Hello and welcome to the first episode of The Session, where we talk everything to do with content. I'm delighted to say we're going to be shortly speaking to Lazar Dzamic and Justin Kirby to talk about their recent publication, hot off the press, The Definitive Guide to Content Marketing. Please remember to like and subscribe to stay ahead of all future episodes. So excited to talk about your new book, Definitive Guide to Strategic Content Marketing. That's quite a bold claim. How did that come about?
Previous to this, I was curating something called the Best of Branded Content Marketing, which was a series of events and publications supported by industry publications and some of the key bodies.
It was great. I was an avid reader.
And thank you. And Lazar very kindly contributed to one of the editions.
I read that one as well.
And he then subsequently invited me to a conference. And as we were sort of having a chat in and around the conference, it was quite clear that both of us had a very sort of similar vision about a book on the same topic, and that was really the kind of sort of cement, I guess, or catalyst for kicking this off.
But to pick up on your question on the definitive and the guide, the definitive was that this is the book about the why of content, not the how, because there's lots of kind of books and blogs and places where people actually find how to do things executionally and tactically. But actually what we realized when we were talking at that conference, that a really high altitude kind of view of the whole area about why content exists in the first place and what's happening today, because there's lots of confusion in that space. We just wanted to map out, that's why the definitive, really map out what is going on across the board, all the perspectives and all the dimensions of it. Yeah. What happened when we started writing the book is we realized it's actually about the future of marketing overall. It's not just that tiny little discipline that people kind of like to box it up in. It's actually much broader than that. That we are talking about now overlapping paradigms, right? One, the interruption paradigm of traditional advertising kind of going down now, and we are kind of asking, so what's coming up? What is going to be that thing, the next thing? And content is the most credible, not the replacement, but the most credible new thing that is now taking over. And that creates lots of confusion, and that's what the book is all about, to try to explain that confusing space.
Who was the audience that you had in mind when you were writing it? Who's this book for?
I think we were really coming from that position about people who are trying to think about these things more strategically. Okay. And that cuts across all the major players, and they are all people who contributed to it. So that's people on the client side, that's people who are in publishing and media, that's the agencies, media agencies.
Yeah.
So
academics as well.
And academics, yeah. And I think partly because, you know, it's one of our slogans in the key takeaways is the customer's journey is anybody's game now. So in theory, it applies to anybody where content is transforming their business models.
Right. I was just thinking, it made me start thinking a couple of things there. There's the new category at Cannes last year was what they set it up. I think it's 2017, first time they had a category which was branded entertainment.
Exactly.
They were saying that's at the forefront of where advertising is now. But from what you're saying, it's what you found out is that in a way that's kind of almost slightly behind the curve.
But in a way, what's interesting about it is they focused on the most narrow aspect of things, because actually that branded content and entertainment space, although it is where those big culture moments, you know, sit, so think Dove Reel beauty sketches, think Always Like a Girl, Jean-Claude Van Damme doing the splits for Volvo trucks. Yeah. So those are the ones which get the sort of 60 million plus views on YouTube or whatever. But actually, if you think of that of content as like a pyramid, they're the smallest part of what is actually created. Yes. You know, the vast majority happens with, you know, actually sort of helpful content that brands are creating. And that's the biggest category of video uploaded to YouTube, is that area, not these large-scale tentpole events with huge investments behind them. No. So it's interesting that they have focused on that area, and in a way that is a kind of natural evolution, because that's the space where the ad agencies are trying to get those kind of large budgets from the clients, but actually the vast majority of work being produced by brands themselves and other agencies is much, the investment is smaller, but there's a lot more of it.
Yes, yeah, because what you're talking about there, the kind of tentpole pieces, that's what I would know. Well, I know you've told me about this. Is about the hero content, so the framework, the Triple H framework. Yeah. Last night you mentioned you need to actually consider something else in that, and we talked about the experience. Could you expand on that?
Well, the 3H framework is still probably the most useful one for brands to consider when they're actually thinking of entering the content area, how to think about structuring what they want to say. But what we realized when we were working on the book, that it still implies separation, that there's hero and there's help and there's hub, almost kind of like separate things. We realized that actually there's a point of connecting, that it'd be even more helpful. It's a great framework, don't get me wrong, we're still kind of advocating it big time. But we think that we should be thinking a little bit more merged, instead of kind of 3 buckets, almost like a sliding scale, that you actually start with 100% emotional resonance or 100% of intent utility, how we called it, how a brand is answering a specific need that a particular person searched for, or kind of showed through signals online that they need.
Intent utility meaning it's really useful.
It's really useful, exactly, and really addressing what the person is searching for online. And you say if these are kind of 2 poles, 2 sides of that sliding scale, actually the answer is most often going to be somewhere in between. We summed it up in kind of 2 sentences. What is useful doesn't have to be boring. Whoever said that useful has to be boring? Right. Could be really emotional, funny, engaging, whatever. And the other bit is what actually plagued, I think, the advertising industry so far, is that what is emotional doesn't have to be expensive. Plus on YouTube, with YouTubers, brands are learning that they simply don't mean anything or a lot in that particular space where people are choosing what to watch. No. You can buy an ad, but on YouTube, people are actually choosing what they want to see. And brands do not really exist in that space quite strongly. No. So that was probably the harshest lesson that I had to learn, which is that I have to borrow credibility from the YouTubers, people who are actually already successful in that space. Right. Which is quite difficult because brands are all about control. Yes. And they've been conditioned to think about it as having total control over the brand voice and everything else. And in that particular space, they just had to learn how to let go a little bit. Not completely let go, but actually find YouTubers who are kind of resonant with their particular tone of voice and involve them in their universe, instead of thinking that it's only the thing that they produce is going to be seen. It just doesn't work in the digital space that well as in the traditional media.
But then on the other hand, you've got the, I don't know what you think of this, but I think they've done a really good job, but you've got the Nike campaign when they're making trainers out of recycled plastic, and suddenly now they've got an authentic voice talking about cleaning up the oceans from a running brand. You can't walk on water, but that's that's.
Well, the sustainability bit is important, because what that is really talking about is identity formation and people. And there's a great slogan that I think it's Virginia Postal, and she has this phrase, I like that, I am like that. Right. So people's identity formation is very much linked to authenticity and purpose.
The other part that jumped out at me last night was is within the context of a chapter that's in the book, is around distribution, and it was the lady from Fold 7 saying that whatever they do now with their content, there is always an element of media spend that's put behind it to give it that amplification. So what have you found out about the actual distribution, getting it in front of eyeballs?
Well, for me, there's 2 points to make. One is that even if you've got a good piece of content, because there's so much content out there, you still have to pay to promote it. You still have to put it on a map of people in order to discover it. So you have to pay for the promotion. But however, even if you've got a budget for promoting it, if the piece of content is bad, then basically you have to pay, all of the money is going to basically go to just paying to put it, to force people to see it. Yeah. So to increase the chances of it actually being naturally, organically spotted and maybe at least partly shared, you also have to invest in producing good content. So all the content, all the media paid and earned. So that's the first point I would like to make. And the second one is that whatever we do, we have to think about moments that matter, designing what Pine and Gilmore would say for time and place. Lots of categories that actually are rich with data and customer interactions. They can actually see what people are searching for, and then being at that particular moment answering that particular need with exactly the right piece of content, which means delivering on that moment that matter. Mm-hmm. The traditional advertising paradigm is generating attention, but that's only part of the story. There's a huge, much bigger universe of attention that already exists that could be harvested, that we also should be mindful of.
Okay, so make sure that your content is there. Work out what the moments are that matter, where your brand can have an authentic voice at serving that information to them at that critical point.
Exactly.
I mean, clearly, there is a trend of people migrating away from linear, traditional TV. It doesn't mean that people aren't still watching TV, and it doesn't say that that still isn't a very important way of helping build brands, etc. But it is about the fact that there are other places that you can connect, and actually, if you don't, someone else will be there at that point when you're not.
The other part that just jumped out at me as well is there's a section in there by Tom Goodwin talking about actually at the moment there's lots of shiny pennies for brands to sort of play in the space of. I think he's mentioned, at the moment if you're in control of some budget, maybe in a brand, it's very attractive to go out and do something in VR or AR. But actually, there's a lot of stuff. If the purpose of content is actually to support a business, a brand, and actually have a commercial driver behind it, from what you're saying is that there's a lot of spaces that you can still do the VR and the AR stuff, but there's a lot of spaces with content that you've got to make sure that you're there first, the moments that matter, because then you can actually prove, I guess, the ROI of content.
Part of the issue is about scale, really. So the kind of criticism of the sort of AR, VR, MR spaces or immersive spaces is how do you scale them? And because not everyone has the equipment to be able to, at the moment, to be able to interact with them. But I would say, my counter to Tom would be that I do think, allocating some budget so that you can experiment with things is not a bad idea, because you may have some massive returns. I mean, one of the stories that I think Lazar and his team, when he was at Google Zoo, shared was Mars with their Pedigree brand and how they use Google Maps with I wouldn't call it necessarily content, but it is a sort of utility execution. So basically they made an app for dog owners, and you could register your dog on it and with a photo, and it had only one action, that if you lost your dog, you just pressed the button which said lost, and then it immediately posted micro ads across the geo-targeted ads on maps saying this dog is lost around here.
Wow. Paid
for by Pedigree.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
So it's advertising as customer service in the moment that matter.
Right, incredible.
So, so there's an experimentation by a brand using a new thing, which probably wouldn't have happened if your argument is don't waste your money on that, you should be just spending your money on TV.
I think that's a very, very important point to make. I think Tom is right, and as Justin said, but we have to qualify. Absolutely, brands have to experiment, have to try, if nothing else, just to understand how those new spaces work. And yes, it's going to be low reach, but at least they can get their heads around how the story is being told in different ways and so on and so forth. However, if you don't have the why, which is why we actually called the book The Why of Marketing, not called it, but treated it as the why of marketing, not the how, then everything you do is going to be completely isolated, it's not going to be connected, and it's going to be a set of isolated, unconnected actions that actually do not work together, do not bring you efficiency, and many of them actually may not have any commercial value whatsoever. So as long as we are distinguishing between the two ways of thinking, we do this to learn, we do this to kind of generate revenue, brand goodwill, whatever, you're fine.
And the truth of the matter is that you need to be doing both.
You need to be doing both. But again, the sad truth is that most of the people are focusing on individual actions without actually thinking of the why first.
Brilliant. Just to wrap up, what would do for anyone that's thinking about diving into this? What would be your almost promo statement of what they're going to find in there in the book, one from each of you.
I would start with the conclusions because they're a condensed way of, they're almost like the architecture of a book. So I'd actually read it in reverse.
Right.
Start at the end. That gives you a kind of structure of the key takeaways from these 60 conversations we had with experts, plus, 20 plus years from each of us at the coalface, and benchmarking the two together, our experiences with the opinions of sort of thought leaders and experts.
That's almost our nosebleed altitude.
Absolutely. So, and I think you can then dip into the different areas of which are really important.
I will sum it up in just one sentence, and that's what the book is ultimately all about. If you really don't know why you're using it across the customer journey, the chances of not doing it well hugely increase.
Right. Fabulous. Thank you very much, guys.